mode 5. Let's go, speed test. 27, 28, 29, 30, 30 and a half, 30. All right guys, hey, real quick, before I get into the details, if you're watching this video and you're like, oh, this guy doesn't suck, be sure to like and subscribe to the video, guys. It does help the channel tremendously, and it doesn't cost anything. Thanks so much. Never seen that before. Pedals, toolkit, charger, bell, and instruction manual.
Hours later.
All right guys, starting from the front of the bike here on the WindOne K20, as with all my reviews, I'm gonna start at the front, I'm gonna work my way back. So starting off from the front, the first thing you'll notice about this bike, well, it's probably the size. The size of this bike, it is a large bike, and I'm gonna put a picture here of this bike compared to a Ride One Up Rev 1 and an Engwe M20, just so you guys can see kind of how big this bike is. One of the characteristics that stands out is the 26-inch tires. These are 26-inch by 4-inch tires. These things are huge. They are massive, which is good and bad, I guess, depending on the kind of riding that you're gonna be doing. The brakes on this thing, one thing I wanna mention on this bike is the brakes. And in the front, it's got a mechanical brake. In the rear, it's got a hydraulic brake. It would make more sense to me if you had the most stopping power on the front of the bike. I would have put a hydraulic brake up front. You know what, honestly, I'd have just done all around hydraulic brakes. The suspension on this bike, it is different than any other e-bike that I've seen or reviewed. The suspension on this bike, this is rigid. The suspension comes from these springs right here, this Springer front end. It's kind of a cruiser type beach e-bike, if you will. It does offer some kind of dampening. It is not gonna offer the type of control and dampening that you get from a hydraulic fork, but for what this bike is for, cruising around your city, the beach, whatever, the sidewalks, it's perfectly fine. Moving back here, inside this case is the battery and the controller. I'm gonna open this up for you guys so you have an idea of what's going on inside here. It's a 48-volt battery, 15 amp hours, and as you just saw in the opener, I got 30 miles per hour on this thing. Moving on here to the back, guys, you'll notice that the suspension in the rear is not built into the frame. They decided to go with a hardtail type frame. Any of the relief that you're gonna get on your ass and back is going to be done by these springs in the seat. The gear shifter on this bike is a 7-speed Shimano gear shifter. Now, some people are kind of yay or nay on the ability to shift the gears on an e-bike. In this example, it is advantageous to have a gear shifter because if you're riding this bike and your battery dies, you got to pedal this sucker, and having the ability to change your gears if you're pedaling at home, that is a nice feature to have. Other people will look at it as a way of more maintenance, a derailleur that you have to keep aligned, more moving parts. It just really depends on what you're looking for, but this particular one has a 7-speed Shimano gear shifter and it works great. Another thing here that you'll notice, and this will help you in changing your tire, is WindOne put the connection for the motor right here. Instead of running a solid wire all the way up into the controller box, they put a brake right here in it. So when you're changing this tire, you're taking the wheel off, you can just unplug it here. On some e-bikes, this is not an option. This motor wire will go all the way into the case and you have to unconnect it from the case. So that's nice to have if you're changing your tire. One other thing I mentioned earlier is the size of the bike. I mentioned the size of the bike and I compared it to 2 other e-bikes that you might be familiar with. This thing is massive. I'm 5'10", 200 pounds, pure granite, pure steel, chiseled marble, holla. Here we go. It's the lowest that the seat can go with that reflector in there. I'm touching flat-footed. I have a 32-inch inseam, or so my wife tells me. Moving up here, y'all, it wouldn't be complete if I didn't show you how the screen looked. The screen, I will say, is a very nice screen. And the power button here, hold that sucker down, it boots up. Nice color screen right here. Full battery, it's got your trip, it's got your miles and your miles per hour. I dig it. Right over here, you got your up and down on your assist modes, all the way up to 5. 5 is your most assisted mode. Coming back down, 0, too easy. Really all the information I want to have when I'm on an e-bike. Now, I would not be doing you, the viewer, a service if I told you only the good things about the bike. When I accept a bike or a product from a company, I want them to understand that I'm gonna review it the way that I see it, and I hope that it brings the most value to you, the viewer, because that's what this is for. A couple things that I am not a fan of with this bike, and it might be just the price point. I wish that it had a built-in brake light. All it has is a push-button, battery-powered brake light. It's not even a brake light, it's just a flashing light. E-bikes in this price range are coming with a wired-in brake light. People don't want to deal with batteries and having to change the batteries in this little light every 3 weeks or whatever. So give me a wired-in light. The other thing, give me matching brakes, matching hydraulic brakes. Don't do a cable in the front and a hydraulic in the back. I don't know what the rationale is behind that. Maybe it's the brake sensor, but there are hydraulic brakes with brake sensors in it that will cut the motor out when you give it throttle. The manufacturer just has to install it, but give me matching brakes. Another thing here with the electronics, guys, is give me a horn. Give me a working horn, a push button horn that comes on all the e-bikes, all the Surons, all the Tolarias. It's not going to add that much more money to the cost of the bike to give me a working horn. If you are expecting people to ride these in cities and busy streets, on sidewalks, at the beach, you gotta have a working horn. Give me a working horn. The little bling bling, that's all fine and good, but for $1,000, I need a working horn. Okay guys, so that is the high level overview of the WindOne K20 e-bike. Let's get it on the road. Let's get some impressions on the ride. The first thing you're gonna notice when you throw your leg over this bike is the seat. It's kind of like the old-fashioned seat, you know, that if you're my age, 40s, and we grew up with these kind of seats, the spring in the seats. It's not uncomfortable, but I wouldn't want to sit on it for very long, but it'll do. The handlebar placement is kind of funky. That's just the style of the bike. That just comes with the style. It's not good or bad, but you do notice the handlebar placement when you're riding this bike, especially if you're coming from a conventional bicycle with a more flat handlebar posture. One thing that I wish the e-bike companies would figure out is how to get rid of the twitchiness when you give it the throttle. So I'm not pedaling, I'm gonna give it the throttle, but it's jerky, it's jolty, and it can take you by surprise. Now, that's not only a feature on this specific e-bike, it's very common in e-bikes in general. Even some of the more expensive ones, they cheap out on the controllers sometimes, and the throttle modulation is not as smooth as what I would like or expect. One more thing worth mentioning, guys, is with e-bikes, a lot of times you are able to get more range by adding a second battery. With this particular bike and the way that this battery is set up in that case, I don't know how easy it would be to install a second battery to extend your range. So if you did want to run a second battery, you could split off of this XT60, have a battery in your backpack, or mount the battery somewhere else on the bike, maybe on a rack or something like that, or on the front. But you could split this XT60, send one side to the battery, send one side to the controller, and then you'd have another separate side of that split you could run to your second battery if you wanted to extend the range on this bike. You would just have to figure out where you want to put the battery and how to mount it. If this particular style of e-bike is not your style, be sure to check out the WindOne website. They have a huge selection of e-bikes of all different styles. Go check them out. I'll have a link in the description below where you guys can check out the other e-bikes